The first step in the manufacturing of any bolt is to cut the round bar to length. Our Peddinghaus shears function much like a guillotine and chop the steel rather than using a saw blade to cut through it. We are capable of shearing round bar up to 2 inches in diameter and up to 100 inches in length. Bolts that are larger in diameter or longer in length are cut using a bandsaw. Next, a hex head is hot forged onto one end of the steel rod. An induction heating coil heats the end of the rod to approximately 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. A National upsetter is then used to forge the heated end of the rod into a hex-shaped head. Gripper blocks clamp the round bar securely in place, while a plunger or die compresses the heated end of the rod, reshaping it into a hex head configuration. A second position in the gripper block is used to stamp the head with the manufacturer's logo and grade symbol as required. The hex head of this anchor bolt will be embedded in concrete and is intended to provide pull-out resistance. High-speed cutting blades apply a chamfer to the ends of the bolts prior to threading. This beveled end will help facilitate easy assembly of the nut once the bolts have been threaded and galvanized. Landis threaders are used to cut 8 inches of thread onto the end of these anchor bolts. Rotating heads contain chasers, which cut away steel from the round bar to produce the threads. A constant stream of cutting oil is applied to reduce friction and to prevent overheating. Threads are gauged by the threading operators to ensure conformance to dimensional tolerances. The bolts must be pickled prior to galvanizing. This process cleans the bolts and prepares the surface of the steel to accept the zinc. Parts are first submerged in caustic soda, which removes cutting oil and other organic materials that accumulate during the manufacturing process. The bolts are then rinsed and submerged in sulfuric acid, which removes any scale from them and etches the surface of the steel. The bolts are rinsed again and then submerged in flux, which is a chemical that assists in the bonding of the zinc to the steel. After pickling, the bolts are placed in racks and lowered into our 12-foot long by 4-foot wide by 7-foot deep tank of 840-degree molten zinc. The bolts remain in the zinc for between 2 to 4 minutes. When the bolts are removed from the zinc, they are spun in a high-speed centrifuge to remove excess zinc from the threads. Due to the proprietary nature of this process, we have not included it in the video. Finally, the bolts are cooled in quench tanks so that they can be inspected and packaged as soon as they are removed from the galvanizing tank. Blue paint is applied to the threaded end of each F1554 grade 36 anchor bolt to identify the grade, as is required by the specification.
The square head machine bolts for this order are manufactured from A36 mild steel round bar, which we receive in 20-foot lengths from a steel mill in McMinnville, Oregon. After the steel is removed from the racks, the first step in the manufacturing process is cutting the bars of steel to length. This is done on one of our shears, which chops the steel like a guillotine. This method of cutting is fast and efficient. Once the material is cut to length, we will put a semi-cone point on the end prior to threading. The purpose of the semi-cone point is to provide ease of installation into the wooden member without the threaded end of the bolt getting snagged on the wood. The semi-cone point is added to, not included in, the length of the bolt. Once the cut-to-length round bar is pointed, they move on to threading. There are 2 methods used to thread bolts, roll threading and cut threading. Roll threading is an extrusion process in which pitch diameter steel round bar is forced between 2 dies to form the threaded portion of the bolt instead of being removed as in cut threading. Because of the size and quantity of pull-line fasteners typically required at a time, roll threading is the preferred method due to the efficient nature of the process. The next step in manufacturing a square head machine bolt is to hot forge the head of the bolt. An induction heating coil heats the end of the round bar to approximately 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. The square head is then forged onto the heated end of the bar, including the grade symbol and manufacturer's marking, which is stamped directly onto the head of the bolt. Now that the bolts are made, the final step is to galvanize them in our hot dip galvanizing tank. Before the bolts are dipped in the zinc, however, they must be prepped so that the steel bonds properly with the zinc. The pickling process involves submerging the bolts in caustic soda, rinsing, and then submerging them in sulfuric acid. This process removes any scale and prepares the surface of the steel to accept the zinc. The bolts are then placed in our hot-dip galvanizing tank, which is filled with 840-degree molten zinc. After the bolts are removed from the zinc, they are spun in a high-speed centrifuge system to spin any excess zinc from the threads so that they easily accept a nut. The bolts are then cooled in quench tanks and inspected to ensure that the zinc has been properly spun out of the threads. After the bolts have been inspected, a square nut is assembled to each bolt. This is a common procedure with pull-line fasteners as a means of keeping all associated parts together. Finally, the bolts are put in boxes, palletized, and marked clearly with the destination, contents, and any other information required. The order is then put on a truck on the day we promise to ship and sent to its final destination.